Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
More turbulence for Boeing as it faces another safety investigation in the US, this time over the 787 Dreamliner. And oil profits are down. Two giants of the industry, BP and Saudi Aramco, report a fall in revenue amid lower oil prices. Hello, welcome to the programme. This is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson, and we begin this programme in the United States, where the troubles facing Boeing have become even more serious. The US air safety regulator has opened a new investigation into the aircraft maker after Boeing acknowledged that it may not have carried out proper quality inspections on its 787 Dreamliner. Well, that follows another probe earlier this year into the safety of its 737 MAX planes, one of which suffered a mid-flight incident when a part of a wall of the plane blew out. From New York, the BBC's Michelle Fleury has the details.
Boeing's work is once again in the spotlight. America's air safety regulator, the Federal Aviation Authority, has opened a new investigation into Boeing after the company came forward and said some employees had committed misconduct by claiming certain tests had been completed when in fact they hadn't. Now, the FAA is investigating whether Boeing completed inspections to confirm adequate bonding and grounding where the wings joined the main body of the plane on certain 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Bonding and grounding is vital on a plane because it prevents static build-up. Think of it as electrical safeguards. Boeing credited a South Carolina worker who saw something they felt was wrong on the production line and came forward and reported it. Cutting corners at work is something that many of us may have been guilty of at various times in our lives. But given the frequency with which quality control issues keep coming up at Boeing, the airline has a long way to go to regain the trust of the flying public, its customers, the airlines, as well as lawmakers.
Let's just take you to France, where the Chinese President Xi Jinping is meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, they're in Tarbes-Lourdes, it's the Pyrenees airport, and a slight break in normal protocol. What's happening is that President Macron is taking President Xi to the birthplace of his grandmother. And he's doing so, his advisors say, because they can have direct one-on-one chats away from perhaps some of the scrutiny of a more formal visit. Now, we understand one of the main objectives of this visit is to try to ease tensions between the West and China, and it's a difficult relationship, one that is largely dominated by trade. So many countries around the world relying on China as the workshop of the world, and also particularly, of course, for its tech exports. But there have been growing tensions on a number of serious geopolitical issues, and it all revolves around trade too, the trade imbalance between the two countries. What President Macron is hoping for is a better deal for European, but notably French firms dealing with China. And President Xi keen, of course, to reiterate the importance of the bilateral links between the two countries. So some of the formalities here before the two men then make their way away from the sight of cameras to begin those talks. So an important moment as the two men meet. It's the second day of President Xi's trip, but so far very little by way of big announcements. There's been no news on new economic policies or new trade deals between the two, but one of the main objectives here is to try and reduce the trade imbalance between China and European firms. We'll keep you right up to date with any developments that emerge from those talks. But I just want to return to our top story, that news that there is a further safety investigation into Boeing. Let's talk now to the business leadership expert, Chris Roebuck. He's from UCL School of Management. And Chris, just Michelle was explaining some of the latest issues here for Boeing. It's really serious, this, isn't it?
Ben, I don't know. I'm laughing. I don't know what to say. Well, something happens at Boeing, and you just think, I mean, this has been going on for 6 years now. You just think it can't get any worse. But they managed to come up with something that is worse. The fact that records might have been altered on the process recording of quality for aeroplanes, the 787, is mind-blowingly worrying. Now, Boeing say, okay, we've checked all the ones on the production line. Yeah, but what about the ones that have left the production line and are out there? It's just so many leadership and culture failures over the last 6 years have created so many really, really stunning safety problems.
If this was any other industry as well, a firm would be seriously looking at its viability given the pretty disastrous issues that have unfolded. But the industry can't afford to let Boeing fail, can it? It's Airbus, Boeing and a couple of other players. It's a dominant it's a market in which it is so dominant it can't afford to fail.
You're right. I mean, in terms of aircraft suppliers, it is a limited market with a limited number of suppliers. But also the problem is it is a safety critical industry. You know, you want to make sure that the plane you're sitting on doesn't have loose bolts or wings that haven't been stuck together properly, or where the Boeing workers were jumping up and down to make sure they fitted. So somebody needs to get a grip of this. And it looks like, obviously, the FAA are involved, the US government are involved, but all the time we keep getting Boeing saying, don't worry, nothing to see here, we've got it under control. The problem is that Boeing started reducing their focus on quality about 20 years ago. And fundamentally, the message that has come down from the company's leadership to the employees over that period in time, they say safety is the most important to the public. But in reality, it's get the planes out as fast as possible, get the money in as fast as possible. And if it's safe, okay, so be it, which is not a way that ethical and leaders with integrity in the aircraft industry should be demonstrating an example.
Chris, we'll talk about this again. There's a lot for us to fit in this show, but grateful for your time this morning. Thank you, Chris Roebuck, there with the latest on what's happening at Boeing. I want to turn our attention, though, now to oil, because two giants of the industry, BP and Saudi Aramco, have released their latest quarterly results. They show a fall in profits as lower oil prices affect revenue. BP's numbers, well, they're down 45% in the first quarter compared to the same time last year. Underlying replacement cost profit, as it's called, was $2.7 billion compared to $4.9 billion this time last year. Well, Saudi Arabia's state oil company Saudi Aramco, for its part, saw profits down by 14% compared to last year. Both Saudi Aramco and BP posted record profits this time last year. So what does it tell us about what's going on? Let's talk to our business editor, Simon Jack. And Simon, what does it tell us about the industry?
It tells us that we are coming out of the back end of the energy crisis that was sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which saw Russian oil and gas supplies either shut off or shunned by many markets, which sent prices rocketing. So we're coming down from there. So I think it's very unlikely that the likes of BP will ever make as much money as they did during that 2022-2023 period. But what is interesting about the BP numbers, down 45% on lower oil and gas profits, they slightly missed the estimates that people said of what they were expecting them to make in profits, whereas Shell, similar company profile, actually exceeded their estimates. And this is down to the fact that Shell has been unapologetically going hell for leather for more oil and gas production. And BP has been less aggressive in that way, saying it's trying to stick to its transition plans. Both have weakened them a little bit, but there is some tension between BP and Shell shareholders, saying some of them would like the BP strategy to be a bit more like Shell. So we'll see where that goes.
All right, we will. Simon, good to talk to you. Thank you. Our business editor, Simon Jack, there. Thanks. Now, in the UK, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who is hoping to take over as Finance Minister at this year's general election, has been giving a speech in which she accuses the government of gaslighting the British people over the state of the economy. Speaking to a room full of business leaders, she said that the government's claims that their economic plan is working are deluded.
They say we've turned a corner, but try telling that to the 6.4 million households across England and Wales last year who saw their rent increase or who had to remortgage. Or the 950,000 families whose mortgage deal is due to expire between now and January next year. They say the plan is working. is this the same plan that has meant that this is forecast to be the first Parliament on record with living standards at the end lower than they were at the start?
Well, that speech comes ahead of key figures that are likely to show the UK emerge from recession. They'll be out later this week. The Bank of England could also start taking steps to cut interest rates. So what does it tell us? Let's talk to Mike Coop from Morningstar Investment Management. Mike, good to have you with us. So Rachel Reeve's pretty critical there of the government's handling of the economy. They are in pre-election mode, though, aren't they?
So, as with any discussion on the economy, it's worthwhile separating out the things that are within the control of the politicians from those that will happen anyway. So I think when we talk about the conditions and what's going to happen, we should be humble about recognizing that there's always shocks that happen. And the state of the play now is actually quite surprising from what people were already expecting. So the comments that were being made about inflation and about growth are really a response to the narrative put forward by the government. And in this, we have to be clear that many of the things being talked about were going to happen anyway. So the inflation dropping was pretty predictable as the impact of the Russian war waned on the price of gas, and that flows through into the cost of heating our homes and the economy. The same thing on growth. We had a big increase in interest rates because of the inflation shock. That's having an effect on weakening growth. And that's actually been a better outcome than people were expecting a year ago when people were forecasting recession. So that's just a backdrop. I think it's worthwhile bearing in mind when you think about what will happen going forward and the difference between who's in office.
Yeah, and Mike, briefly for us, the government will probably be cursing the timing of all of this because they've got to have an election before January of next year. But actually, if they had a little bit longer, we might start to feel better off as interest rates come down, inflation starts to ease. But it might be that we're still feeling worse off at the election.
So the underlying drivers haven't really changed of the economy, even though that big surge in inflation has come off. We still are going to continue to have interest rates higher than we used to.
Yeah.
And the government choices are hemmed in by a large amount of debt deficits, high taxes, and so on. So I think in terms of thinking about this going forward, the real issue is probably going to be whatever administration there is, how they deal with the global shifts around AI, regional trading, decarbonisation. But for assets and for people who own assets in the UK, it's also a case of whether there'll be more certainty of policy and whether that will actually benefit UK assets because there won't be as much of a risk premium for uncertainty.
Really good to talk to you, Mike. Thanks very much, Mike Coop there, Morningstar Investment Management. Now, before we go, some news about us. After more than 30 years, we're going to say goodbye to World Business Report. Well, it's had quite a few different looks over the years. This one from the late 1990s, well, WBR as we call it, it looked like, well, this until 2007, when a new look arrived and everything went quite blue. And then came our spiky globe in 2013. We love it. But it's time for a new look and a new name. Business Today is what will be called from later today. All you need to know about money, markets, finance, tech, travel and trade. Business Today here on BBC News. But for one final time, from me and the team, you've been watching World Business Report. Bye-bye.